myself again. But it's the only way you're ever gonna learn. You look back and it's all in the past. I'm dwelling on the thoughts I cannot say to you. If I don't say the words, then maybe it's not true. And it feels alright when they come and say to you.
Good morning, welcome to NUFC Matters with me, Steve Wraith. Ben Jacobs is on his way. I'm just laughing at that comment that's come in. Is Ben knitting his jumper? But you never know. Geordie Toomper Life. Maybe he may be getting one of those new jumpers and knitting it himself. Time will tell, I guess. Okay, as always, I don't get much chance to speak when Ben's on, so I will have a look at your comments. But what I will do is I'll play the ads now, and then you've got uninterrupted Ben Jacobs when he finally joins. They should be with us around about 11:10. Here's the ads.
A big thanks to all our sponsors: Skips and Bins, telephone 0800 25 45 25 3, email inquiries at skipsandbins.com, website skipsandbins.com, easy contract free and pay as you go waste collection. Thanks also to Mr. Vicky's, handmade in Cumbria. These sauces are really hot stuff. You can order them by emailing info@mrvickies.co.uk or by telephoning 01768 210 102. Thanks to Neil and the guys at Media Arts for all the help with the video side of things. And thanks to qtechshop.co.uk, the makers of pool tables and snooker tables in Wallsend, Newcastle, and the guys who run our website, nufcmatters.com. If you want to subscribe to the show, hit the subscribe button tonight. It is free. Hit the thumb up under the video to like the video and click share to share to your other social media. If you want to join the channel, hit join. There's 3 different tiers. Pick the one that suits you and help support the channel financially. If you want to pay a one-off membership fee of £25 and get these goodies, a scarf, a pen, a cup, and entry into the monthly draw, then go to NUFC Matters and look for membership pack. Failing that, get your smartphone and put it over the QR code and it will take you straight there. We're also a podcast and you can find us on iTunes, Spotify, Podbean, and other podcast providers. Usually goes up 24 hours after the show has finished. We also support the food bank on this channel. If you want to make a virtual donation today at the Matchday Bucket, go to nufcfansfoodbank.co.uk and you can make a deposit today. Don't forget to enter the Shearer raffle. There's 150 tickets, £1 per ticket, and you can win a limited edition signed Alan Shearer ball. Enter now at nufcmatters.com. If you have a look on our website, we've also got a vast range of mugs, t-shirts, cups, and whatever else takes your fancy. The Isaac t-shirt is proven popular this month, $16.99 plus delivery from nufcmatters.com. Don't forget as well, we do a range of events over the course of the year. We have Peter Beardsley, an up-close and personal evening at the Tynemouth Surf Cafe. Limited tickets remain, 25th of April. Get them now from Surf Cafe, tynemouth.co.uk or from ticketweb.uk. There's also an evening with Peter Beardsley on May the 19th at the Tyneside Irish Centre, and you can get tickets from newcastlelegends.com, and tickets are £50. Don't forget our end of season do takes place 27th of May, 7 o'clock at the Tyneside Irish Centre. Tickets for that one are a tenner. NUFCmatters.com is where you can get your tickets for that. In June, Thursday, the 1st of June to be precise, Rob Lee will be at Louis Liquor Store in the Big Market in Newcastle, and tickets for that are available direct from the venue. And an evening with Rob Lee, Lee Clark and John Beresford takes place the next evening on Friday the 2nd of June at the Grand Hotel in Gosforth. This is a charity event and tables are of £10, £700, and you can book them by contacting Natalie at heelandtoe.org.uk or visiting their website. In July, Gavin Peacock is in Newcastle on July the 10th at the Tyneside Irish Centre. Tickets for that are available from nufcmatters.com. And he also takes an evening with at the Surf Cafe in Tynemouth on the 11th of July. So get your tickets direct from the venue for that one as well. And if you're a boxing fan, the Night of Champions, Ricky Hatton, Frank Bruno, Nigel Benn and Joe Calzaghe takes place at the Fed. And that will be taking place on the 16th of June. More dates to be added. Tickets from all those events, www.goldstarpromotions.co.uk.
Okay, Newcastle United take on Southampton tomorrow, and Southampton rock bottom of the Premier League. Newcastle, I never ever thought I'd hear myself say these kind of things. Looking for that 10th Premier League home win of the season. 3 points tomorrow would be Newcastle's 263rd Premier League victory on home soil and their 400th win anywhere. Hoping to maintain our 100% record, of course, against Southampton. This will be the fourth meeting, obviously having played them twice in the Cup. It's a 2 o'clock kickoff at St James's Park, but surprisingly, it's not on television. I'm sure some of you out there will find a way of watching the game, though. The visitors have requested a reduced ticket allocation. I think they took in the region of 1,700 and sold those tickets. So good news, I guess. It means there was a few extra tickets for Newcastle United fans for this game. ASM remains sidelined. We were robbed of the usual press conference by Eddie Howe, which I tend to review on the channel. Obviously did a quick press conference after the win at Goodison Park and then concentrating on the game ahead. So all we know is ASM remains sidelined. We covered it on the Amigos last night. A lot of people scratching their heads over what's going on. What Eddie says in the press conference is what seems to be happening on ASM's social media. Seems to be a little bit of conflict there. Is he going? Who knows? Will be interesting. I am going to do a pre-record later this afternoon with Stu Penman and with Mitch. I'm sure we'll get into that. That'll be up early tomorrow morning, 9:30. The professionals will go out, pre-recorded show, 9:30 in the morning. So you've got something to watch with your breakfast before the game. Pre-match, Super Mac is holding his usual pre-match and post-match talk-ins at the Dog and Parrot. He will be at the Dog and Parrot from midday. And then he'll be returning around about the 4:45 mark on Clayton Street in Newcastle. Normal service resumed as well at Pumphrey's in the big market. Gibbo will be there with Radio Newcastle and former Newcastle legend and fullback John Anderson giving their views on the game. Pre-match only for that one. Southampton, of course, arrive at St James's Park. They have not won a game now in their last home and away fixtures. They do have a better points return on the road, though, rather than at home. 14 points on the road, 10 at home, but that leaves them rock bottom of the Premier League. The referee tomorrow is Anthony Taylor. This is only second game in charge of Newcastle United fixture this season. The first was that 2-0 home defeat against Liverpool, and of course Nick Pope was sent off, which meant he missed the Carabao Cup final. VAR, well, that's Robert Jones, not a name that we've heard a great deal of. Don't forget as well, the food bank will be in place opposite Shearer's Bar outside the ground. Pop over there, stick your money in the bucket, and anybody who puts the money in the bucket will have the joy of knowing that the Rubens are maintaining what they did last season, doubling all cash donations that are made on match day. So big game for Newcastle tomorrow. As you know, on the Amigos, we always have Toon Stato giving us his little bit of info. So I thought I would play that again whilst we're waiting for Ben.
Hello guys, what incredible couple of last games. I'm running out of stats, or actually the stats are so many that a couple of minutes are not enough. The team is flying. We have 62 points from 32 games, and we have had only one season with better points tally after 32 games. Is the legendary 95-96 season in the Premier League, when we had 67 points after the 32 games. You might remember that we finished at 78. If we win our last remaining 6 games, we are on course to finish with 80, which can be our best ever season in the Premier League out of 38 games and in total. When it comes to away games, we have already won 8, and we have done so only in 3 previous seasons, back in 93-94, when we played in total 21 games, 2001-2002, and 2011-2012. We still have 3 away games remaining, so we might as well beat our best ever performance of 9 wins in a season. When it comes to goals, we have scored 29 goals away from home so far after the Everton demolishment, and so far the record was 27 in 2 seasons, 2011-12 and 2002-2003. When it comes to Southampton, we've already beaten them 3 times this season, and they might become the first club we beat 4 times in a single season for a long time. I need to check since when, but the funny thing is that it will be the 3rd manager that faces us in Ruben Sellets. We've already beaten the Saints with Ralph Hasenhüttl in his last game for them, and twice with Nathan Jones in the League Cup. So, a legendary season in the making. Let's enjoy it. Away the lads. Up the Champions League we will go.
Great stuff as always from Andre. And before I bring Ben in, a couple of shameless plugs. You will have seen a bit on social media anyway, but my new film is out, Trafficking. You can get that now on Amazon, on Sky, all your places where you can get video and film downloads. That is out now, and the reviews have been quite good. Very happy to say. And for those of you who are interested in the new breed of criminal, which you'll have all read about as well, the final trailer has come out. We still haven't got a release date for it, but I'll play the trailer just before we bring Ben in. Good morning, Ben. How are you?
Well, I was doing all right until I saw that slightly ominous trailer, and now I'm a little bit terrified to be on a podcast with you. Is there a sort of knife somewhere out of vision? It looked fantastic, though. Congratulations.
Thanks, mate. Yeah, I do a little bit of work away from the podcast, but great to have you on, as always, and appreciate you're a busy man, so we will crack on. I managed to keep the viewers interested enough to wait until you apparently knitted a new jumper. That's what a lot of people were saying in the chat, and you have. I've not seen you wear this one before.
This is Hogwarts, and I am a Hufflepuff.
There you go. Less said about that, the better. Then I'm sure the chat will have their own say. The way Howe has managed Wilson and Isak is brilliant. Will tomorrow be the day he starts them both? Let's start with that, because we end up going down political routes with you, Ben, on here. So let's talk football for a little while. Isak and Wilson, what's your take on the way that Howe's managed them?
I think brilliantly. 2 very different players and management styles, in the sense that one has always been about managing both minutes and expectations in return for a high goal yield, and the other, when he first came to the club, was about Premier League integration. And in many ways we're seeing a little bit of a flip now, where Wilson is naturally still weighing in with very important goals, but the feeling for me is that Isak is shining, much like Botman, by the way, and Bruno, earlier than expected, which probably is an outside-in perspective, in the sense, if you ask Newcastle and their recruitment team, I'm sure they'll say, we always knew they'd hit the ground running. That's why they're smart signings. But with Isak, he needed a little bit of time to adapt, to get fit and play Premier League minutes. And now we're seeing just how important he is to Newcastle United, and maybe sooner than expected. And both Wilson and Isak are in incredible form. So there's a logic in some ways to try and have them coexist, even though maybe at the beginning of the season that was not necessarily the intent. But I think that, for me anyway, it's really more about consistency. So if you're Eddie Howe, in the long term, you might say, can they play together and how do they play together? But in the short term, I think it's far more important that Newcastle United just stick to what Newcastle United have been doing, which is a 4-3-3 with either Wilson or Isak, and then obviously playing Joe Linton and Almiron. And then beyond that, the rest of the side at the moment, for me, picks itself, because Willock's in good form. We know about Bruno as well. I'm always impressed by Longstaff, who constantly pitches in a more underrated way. And we know about that back 4, plus Pope, traditionally picks itself. So when you're trying to make Champions League football, and when you've come off the back of a 4-1 victory away at Everton, and before that, a 6-1 thrashing of Spurs, it's very difficult, in my opinion, to change things unless you have to. So if we look at the Tottenham game, it was Isak leading the line, and then Murphy played well and got a brace, obviously, and Joe Linton was in there as well. And then come Everton, because Newcastle had gone from a Sunday to a Thursday, there was obviously a change, and Wilson comes back into the side, gets 2 goals. Joe Linton scored in that game as well, so there becomes a selection headache. So I think it's quite difficult for Howe to have Wilson and Isak coexist when, for many of these last results that we've seen, he hasn't gone down that line. But that said, if you sort of look at the last 3 selections, and I'm thinking about the Villa defeat as well, where Newcastle didn't play well, but still that front 3, I think, was Murphy, Isak, and Gordon started that game, and Joe Linton therefore would have played a little bit deeper. So we are seeing Howe be a bit flexible and change the dynamic, and we are seeing the 4-3-3 adapt a bit in terms of personnel across recent games for various reasons. Sometimes, of course, it can be down to injury, other times form. But when Newcastle won away at Brentford, I think it was Isak that scored key goal, Joe Linton was there, and then Murphy was the other player. So someone in the middle, Isak or Wilson, seems to kind of pick itself. And Joe Linton, if he's playing in a more advanced role, which I think is sensible because you'd want Willock, Bruno and Longstaff behind, that's sensible. And then there's only one spot, and you've got Almiron, you've got Murphy. So it's quite hard in my mind to see how they fit in a 4-3-3 and they coexist. And it feels a bit risky when you've just won 4-1 and you've just won 6-1 for the sake of trying it, to try it now. But that said, Newcastle got a bit of breathing space, and Southampton at home is a very winnable game. So if you were to chop and change, this might be the game, because you're not going to do it at home to Arsenal. Away at Leeds is tricky. Home to Brighton is tricky. And then the last games of the season, obviously, are not ideal because there's no way that Newcastle beat Leicester. So they better pray that they've got Champions League football before then. And away at Chelsea, I mean, it should be a win on paper, but it's the last game of the season. It's unpredictable. So who knows in that game as well. So Southampton is probably the game where if you were going to try something, there's a bit less risk, at least on paper, even though they showed what they can do against Arsenal. But my sense is that even if logically in the long term, there should be a way of finding out how Isak and Wilson can coexist, the priority is just momentum. And if there's a better front 3 and a dynamic for now to just get the points needed to keep that gap and get over the line in Champions League football, then Howe would be better off thinking about the bigger picture than specifically trying to work the 2 into the same lineup.
Yeah. Okay. John Askew was in early with this one. He says, morning all. Ben, City are owned 100% by Arabs, yet there's been little or no criticism of their owners. That's okay. But when it comes to Newcastle, we seem to get stick from everyone. Why does such clear double standards exist? When City beat Arsenal, the media are waxing lyrical about their football. If and when we start winning stuff, we'll almost certainly have to endure jibes about Saudi money. Any idea why, bearing in mind no one seems to bat an eyelid over the Etihad boys? And we'll tie this in with David John Cook's question, and BT mentions it as well. What are Ben's views on the Villa CEO interview? Just to remind you, BT puts it in. Christian Perslow, bearing in mind his connections with other members of the Big Six in the past. Liverpool springs to mind. Talking about Newcastle United, if there is a contradiction in representation made at the time of the takeover, of course the Premier League, I'm sure, are investigating that. I mean, it's starting to become boring now, Ben. We just laugh at it on this platform. It really is, and there just seems to be so many people just gunning for Newcastle, but it's now starting to look stupid on a lot of these people. What's your take on all of that that's happened this week?
I mean, the first thing is my take is Brexit, which is a strange thing to say, but I'll explain. When we had should we stay or go within Brexit, everyone on social media was seeing things that were tailored towards their own algorithm, which means that those that were pro-Brexit felt like there was overwhelming support, and those that were anti-Brexit felt like there was overwhelming support. So then if the vote didn't go the way you wanted it to, there was a surprise because everybody around you was kind of saying the same things. And when you're a football fan, and particularly when you engage in social media or just media, you see a lot about your club, and that will include, therefore, a lot more criticism. Whereas because you're not on the Manchester City podcast, the Manchester City media alerts, the Manchester City algorithm, if you like, you may well be missing aspects of criticism and then thinking that there are double standards. So I empathise, and I agree that because Newcastle is fresher and because it's PIF and because there is that connection with MBS, not saying legally, not talking about separation. I just mean the fact that go to the website, he's there, and obviously the chief person running PIF. There's a lot of debate, and that's normal because every time Newcastle do well and succeed, people will equate it with the new ownership because in essence, Newcastle are moving very fast, perhaps even faster than has been expected. So it would be normal to put the success down in a positive way as well to new ownership. But as soon as you say that, you'll get a lot of people also talking about how they've somehow bought their way to success. And as I've said many times, they've definitely invested in a smart way. But look at the amount of players that are also just at their peak under Howe, that were at the football club before, or that were bought at the football club when they were bottom of the league and have now been able to get Newcastle out of trouble and continue that momentum. So it isn't all about crazy money. It isn't all about dropping 600 million. Newcastle have been very smart and sensible, and they've tried to stay within financial fair play. And I don't expect that to change until they first get Champions League football and then have it more regular. But when people sort of say double standards, I do think it's important to understand that you see a lot more on Newcastle than you do on Manchester City. So believe it or not, and maybe Newcastle fans will laugh at this as well, with the Manchester United takeover, every single day I get 500 messages accusing me of attacking Manchester United and only caring about Manchester United and only giving scrutiny on Manchester United and being biased and unfair against a Qatari takeover of Manchester United. And the reason Newcastle fans will laugh is how many times during the Newcastle United takeover was I referred to as a Qatari stooge, somehow in beIN Sports' back pocket, pro-Qatar, anti-Saudi Arabia. And now in the Manchester United narrative, I'm apparently anti-Qatar, but I'm not. I'm trying to cover it with scrutiny and be as balanced as I possibly can. And maybe I'll win some of those Manchester United fans over, and maybe I won't. And I think the other thing is just sometimes there is a difference between football and infrastructure. So the sad reality, and it is a sad reality, is that some people have forgotten about how Manchester City built their success. And because it's been around for longer, it means that we look at everything through football and the form of Haaland and De Bruyne's immense talent and Grealish who's improving. And in many ways, I think that's right. If we're only judging the football, we should praise the football because however it's been put together, it's still 11 people on a field. And if they play sensationally, we should applaud that. But that's the same for Newcastle United as well. And it would be unfair to say how brilliant Manchester City were against Arsenal and not say how brilliant Newcastle were against Spurs, because that's just a like-for-like football comparison. But I think in my case, I've done that repeatedly. I've tried to separate judging Howe and what he's doing with judging the ownership group. And the ownership group will always need scrutiny, and we do have to try and be as balanced as we possibly can. But there's also just that aspect, unfortunately, and I say this as a journalist because it's the reality of the news cycle of what's fresh and what's not fresh. So we should always have a responsibility to dig. And I'm sure when the Manchester City hearing begins, you'll learn a lot more through the media and feel that they do care and that they are covering it and that there is balance and that it's not all just Newcastle bashing. But right now we've got a scenario where Newcastle's project is developing There'll be new sponsorship coming in. There'll be trips to the Middle East and North Africa. The success will have come within about 18 months of the takeover. It will go from being bottom of the table to, in all likelihood, Champions League football in a very short space of time. And people will come back to that same question, regardless of praising Howe or Botman as a signing or Bruno as an influencer or Isak as someone that scored big goals, all of which we should be doing as well. It will still come back to PIF and why haven't they spoken to the media? Why are they not as transparent? And with Manchester City, the fact that their owners never speak has been a bit forgotten, and maybe it will come back to the fore. But again, I say, I empathize, and it may feel like certain people have got certain agendas against certain clubs. But most journalists I know, and myself included, are genuinely just trying to learn and dig. And we can't know everything. We can't cover everything. We can't do everything. Think of the time and effort it took to cover the Newcastle takeover. If you'd have asked me at the same time to do Manchester United and Manchester City and anybody else, I wouldn't have that capacity. So you do have to pick your stories, not out of agenda, but just out of being human. And hopefully your outlet has somebody else that will then look at the other story whilst you're busy. But I think that there's just also a factor in all of this around freshness and not wanting to target Newcastle because things are happening, but just being able to do so because it's a bit more evolving maybe than Manchester City at this stage, which is stabilized. And that is a sad reflection in football in many ways, that we're just used to the norm of that type of ownership. And obviously those that are against Newcastle will say we shouldn't normalize and just get used to the PIF-led type of ownership. But from my perspective, I'm very open about it. I'm very balanced about it. I lived in the Middle East. I went to Saudi many times. I've seen the good. I've seen the bad. So what I'm asking for as a journalist is not really a position that says they're good or they're bad. I'm just calling for transparency, which was the buzzword during the takeover. I expect them to be accountable and answer their questions and lay out their vision and position. Now, maybe that's idealistic because Man City's owners don't do that. Arsenal's owners don't even do that. Not many owners come to the table and outline their vision. But I suppose the Newcastle takeover for me was a way to counter the noise and continue the transparency narrative from the takeover and go against the grain and go against the norm and come forwards like Amanda Staveley's doing, to her credit, and say, we're there, we're present, we speak, we engage. And I would like to still see that from Yasser Al-Rumayyan, because then if anyone questions Newcastle, if anyone attacks Newcastle and it's unjust and fans are unhappy, you don't have a leg to stand on as a journalist as much when you've got your response. You can bash away all you like if they don't respond, and you can write and you can find information and you can provide insight and you can provide views. But if the ownership group have nothing to hide and Al-Rumayyan sits down and just says his piece, then we would look very silly as journalists after a certain point, hounding away and hounding away and hounding away because we've got our answers. And then it's up to the fan base to take those answers and decide what they think of them. So I think that there's not necessarily an agenda, in my opinion, against Newcastle United. It's just that Newcastle fans are more acutely aware of the coverage surrounding their club. And they don't like that the Saudi money aspect keeps coming up because they believe that the factors to success are momentum from last season, are getting the best out of players that were already there, like Miguel Almiron.
Nine players that finished the Spurs game all played for Steve Bruce. Nine players. And let that sink in to any journalist that's having a pop. That's Eddie Howe coming in and doing what he's done. It's not financial. I just think it all stinks of sour grapes. Derek Platten's put the quote in there, and this was what the Villa chairman stated. Well, it wasn't the chairman, it's the CEO. He said, even if MBS came out and admitted that the Saudi state does own PIF, there are no international sanctions against Saudi, so the Premier League would be powerless. It's all water off a duck's back. The takeover's gone through. Move on. Stop trying to, cause trouble for Newcastle because they are now, sitting at the top table. It's as simple as that, And when they do start spending, I think we've got people terrified in boardrooms up and down the country. And I tell you what, if we want transparency, Ben, let's get all 20 Premier League clubs to be transparent. Let's have it all out in the open. Let's see what skeletons are in Arsenal's cupboard, Aston Villa's cupboard, Manchester United's cupboard. Chelsea's cupboard will be interesting. Everton's cupboard. Let's get it all out in the open. If we're going to have transparency, let's not pick on Newcastle United. Let's have everybody out in the open telling us who exactly is running what and who's doing what. Because you know what I believe? I think I'll be proved right with this. I still think that Abramovich has his hand in Chelsea's business. And I think at some point that'll all become transparent. Any club that goes out and spends the money that they've spent, with a new owner coming in, that's not him flexing his financial muscles. That's for me. That's Abramovich still involved somewhere along the lines. But that's what I just want: transparency at all the clubs, including Newcastle. Let's have transparency across the board, Ben, and I'll be happy. Leicester as well.
Yeah, and I mean, this is my point as well, that I said it during the takeover. What we shouldn't be doing, and I'm not specifically talking about Newcastle, is deciding what the rules are going forwards based on what we've inherited. In other words, if Manchester City is not right for football, then you don't want to endorse a new takeover just because it's the same as Manchester City. Because what that's doing is allowing somebody in because you've already got somebody like them in. And what you can do is, as you say, Steve, the opposite. You can make things more robust and transparent. And if that means going back to people that are already in and saying, sorry, you can't be in anymore, so be it. And let's not forget, Manchester City basically had to kick out Thaksin Shinawatra before these owners because of his personal situation. Chelsea had to effectively kick out Roman Abramovich, or Abramovich chose to leave because of the sanctions against him. So there's a lot of worry around an owner, and what we should be doing is making the rules transparent and robust. And if that means implementing them retrospectively but fairly across the board, so be it. Rather than saying, why can't Newcastle have a sovereign wealth fund? Manchester City have got a sovereign wealth fund. So either both can or both can't. And if both can't, you've got to be transparent and consistent about it. And if both can, you've got to shut up about it. And I think that this is my belief. And I would like to see all owners be more transparent. And in the case of Newcastle, I would like to see Yasser Al-Rumayyan specifically speak. We've said this many times, whether that's to the media or to the fan base. And I saw in the chat a question as to whether I've ever reached out to Yasser Al-Rumayyan many times. I've come across Al-Rumayyan. I've worked with Al-Rumayyan because when I was in the Middle East, I used to edit a golf magazine, and he's president of the Golf Federation. And obviously now he's heavily involved in Live Golf. And what was interesting is that when the Saudi Golf Federation launched an event in Saudi Arabia, it was after the murder of Jamal Khashoggi. And that entire press conference was around questions to Al-Rumayyan on Khashoggi. And he was quite happy to answer them. Of course, there was a line. And of course, we didn't learn a massive amount. But this is not an individual that is uncomfortable answering a tough question. He was directly asked at a golf press conference a few years back, do you believe the Saudi Arabian government murdered Jamal Khashoggi? And he was quite happy to answer it. Of course, he said no. Of course, he said the government line, and then it's up to people to investigate and interpret that. But he's not shying away because he can't do media. He's shying away because they are majority owners and controlling owners that are letting Amanda Staveley and the Rubin brothers do all of the PR and do all of the day-to-day operational side at the football club. And that's fine, but they could still come out and say that. And I think the fan base would appreciate that. You want to hear from an owner in the right environment, so you understand the vision. And I just think that with the double standards, again, I get it, but there's two sides. Side one is Newcastle United fans feel aggrieved. And what you say is very important, Steve. There's a lot at the football club that has just come to life under Howe. Then there's an element of smart funding, which, yes, is new ownership money, but they've not spent to an excess. They spent more than most in January, but they had to try and stay up. But if you look at any one individual signing, other than the bigger fee for Isaac, most of what they've spent is fantastic value. And Isaac is obviously growing day on day on day into his price tag. And if the goals in the back half of the season qualified Newcastle for the Champions League, it's already money well spent. So I think all of that is about Howe, and all of that is about the club momentum. But of course, it's from new ownership money. But what do you expect? Bill Foley's come in at Bournemouth and has spent a ton of money. And nobody's going, oh, that Foley, his money's kept Bournemouth up. How dare he? They're going, what a great owner. He invested in his football team. And this is what Newcastle have done. They've not financially doped. They've just spent a normal, in January, a large amount, but in the summer, a normal amount of money to try and improve. And through a combination of good management, existing players, and some good new signings, they've improved. And fair play to them. That should be celebrated. That's exciting for the fan base. But we still have that separate aspect of who are these owners, what is their vision, and what is their plan. And I'm not saying we need to bash Newcastle for that, but I'm just saying that every owner needs to be transparent, in my opinion. The Newcastle ones, the Manchester City ones, the Manchester United ones. And where I just take issue about it being a Newcastle agenda is Newcastle fans will say, I've got a Newcastle agenda, but then I'll go away and Manchester United fans will say, I've got a Manchester United agenda. And then the City fans will say it. And then the Chelsea fans will say it. And before you know it, you're like, do you not read and listen to any of my work? But of course you don't. Why would a Newcastle United fan tune in to hear me talk about the Chelsea takeover? Why would you tune in to a Manchester United news hit? Why would you read an article about why Thomas Tuchel was sacked? So I think this is where the false perceptions of journalists come from. And most of us are very open. Why do I come on these podcasts? Because I want to engage. I want to get a sense of the fan base. I want to try and answer your questions. I don't believe in hiding. So if you disagree with me, fine. And if we have a debate, fine. And if you think that I've got an agenda, fine. But you can never say that I didn't come on the show and offer up my perspective and allow myself to be questioned with a counterpoint. And then if we go away and you still think I've got an agenda, that's fine. But it's not intentional. I'm not waking up in the morning and saying, how can I piss off the Newcastle fan base? How can I generate a story that clickbaits? How can I be sensational in a way that will rile Newcastle and bash Saudi Arabia? I'm getting up and I'm drinking from this cup. And on one side of this cup, it's got a Newcastle logo. And on the other side, it's got my actual team, a Leicester logo. And I'm just trying to do my job.
And you do a great job for me, Ben. You know, you became a good friend of the show during the takeover. You know, you were brought on really because you were given a completely different view. You were, but ultimately you've become somebody who's become a valuable part of the team. Nice to have you on and get your opinion. And I think it's always a different view, a balanced view. And as you say, you can bring some of the other clubs to the table as well, and you can talk openly about it because you do the other podcasts. So I don't often see it, but thanks always for coming on, Ben. It is good for you to be part of it, We're going to move on. BT said, do you think that the new sponsorship deal, which is around 25 million per year, could even be seen as a little on the low side when you consider we've got a shirt sleeve sponsorship that is worth 7.5 million? It depends whether Noon are the actual shirt sponsors, because I know they certainly put themselves in the frame for it. Andy Embleton said, see the new shirt sponsorship deal is reported at around 25 million. Does Ben think the Premier League will think this is a fair value? And do you think the cartel will kick up a fuss? Well, they'll kick up a fuss about anything, won't they? And have you got any idea who it is, says Roger? New forthcoming sponsor for us, Ben. Any names? Well, we'll be doing this on the professionals tomorrow morning with Stu and Mitch. They've got their ideas. But what's your thoughts on that? 25 million? Are they getting a good deal?
Well, it's a good deal in the sense it's a rise from 8 million to 25 million or something in that ballpark. And there may well be the ability to increase it further over time if Newcastle repeatedly qualify for the Champions League, because there's obviously added value in terms of the global audience at play when you're playing in Champions League, but it's more games and it's more shirt sales as well. So all of this is very positive, in my opinion, in many ways. My understanding is that Newcastle have been looking in the MENA region, which means that it's not likely to be a Saudi-specific sponsor, although I do expect them to do something with Saudi Airlines as well, and that will be around perhaps branding or something non-apparel, or even maybe over time something that isn't the shirt, but is something that you can wear. And then on the front of the shirt, it wouldn't remotely surprise me if we're talking out of the Middle East and it isn't Saudi specific, something in the region of finance or telecommunications. And that's largely just because if you look at PSG, and this is Qatar, so I'm not saying these brands, but what direction have they gone in? They've moved in a flight-based direction on their front of the shirt, and they had Ooredoo, which is a phone provider, on the back, and then they've gone with banks and cars. And when I've put this to sources, those are the kind of ballparks that have been discussed. So there are obviously telecommunications providers that are not Saudi-based or are not only Saudi-based, but are all across the Middle East and North Africa. So that could be one option. Banks are always a good one because they can potentially be based in MENA, but branch out to other areas. If you look, for example, at Qatar Islamic Bank, who won't be the ones in this context that are the sponsors, and also Emirates MDB, they are based predominantly and localized in MENA, but they often, again, have branches elsewhere that can be utilized by people. And the banks quite like that because maybe if they're an Islamic bank, they might want to open something in Newcastle. They might already have a presence in London. So banks are always ones to look out for as well. I'd be surprised if it's outside of the Saudi region, if it's an aviation industry, because naturally there's competition in politics. So if you're going to put an airline on the front of your shirt, it would basically have to be the new Saudi national carrier rather than, for example, an Emirates style business. Otherwise, perhaps there might be some conflict. But that all said, people may remember with PSG, it was Qatar and it was Emirates. So you can never entirely rule it out because money can talk. But at 25 million quid, it doesn't feel right to me that anything would be tied in with a rival to something, particularly something in aviation that is brand new in Saudi Arabia. I would be surprised if it's oil and gas, because one of the main things within the Vision 2030 sports strategy is to try and generate income and exposure away from that sector to make Saudi Arabia and the MENA region more sustainable. So if, again, the strategy behind the sponsorship is thinking about the Saudi vision or the MENA vision or tourism, then ultimately the partner that is picked will not be at odds with that vision. But this is sort of coming back to what we said before, why we need to hear from Yasser Al-Rumayyan, because Newcastle may announce this and turn around and say, we didn't even factor in any vision. We didn't even factor in any tourism. We didn't even factor in any Saudi. We simply knew that Newcastle was growing, and we're already big in Saudi Arabia. We've got ultimately a shirt sleeve sponsor that can promote our outlet. And now we want to move into the UAE, or now we want to move into, wouldn't it be controversial, but Qatar, or now we want to be MENA wide. So sponsorship's a weird one, because if you tie yourself to something MENA wide or outside of specifically Saudi Arabia, you can broaden. And maybe the route here is all about growing that Newcastle brand first in MENA. And then when you monopolize MENA from a visual point of view, from a fan base point of view that grows, you then might have the opportunity to move a bit wider into the Gulf or into North Africa or into somewhere like Asia, all parts that basically there's big gain for Newcastle, because these are the big ones, particularly like North Central Africa and Asia. And then America is another one where Newcastle are not big. And I don't mean that disrespectfully. I just mean big as a brand compared to Manchester United, Liverpool, etc. But if they have Champions League and if they have the right sponsor and if they have the right positioning, then they can be in a position where they make a bigger revenue growth. And I always give Leicester as an example, because when Leicester went to Thailand, it was ridiculous. You suddenly landed in Bangkok airport and there were Jamie Vardy and Kasper Schmeichel's shirts everywhere. It was almost laughable, because why would Bangkok suddenly become a Leicester fan? But you land, you see the shirts, you realise that the owners are closely affiliated to the king and they got on at that time. So you purchase it because it becomes sort of a badge of national identity. And with that, your sales go up. And usually shirt sales don't matter in the bigger picture. Like when people say sign Messi, think about the shirt sales, you make money. Usually it's a tiny percentage. But look at it in this context. If every Newcastle shirt is 50, 60 quid, and because of who your sponsor is in that region, you can ship an extra couple of 100,000, and that might be across multiple regions, and they might buy 2 shirts, or they might buy a mug, or they might fly over and watch a Newcastle game. Over the course of a season, that might add up to 5 to 7 million or more. So then, is the shirt sponsor 25 million a year? Or because you're opening yourself up to a new demographic, is it 25 million a year plus that added revenue, which is much higher because it's a new region than it would be if it was a Manchester United or a Liverpool operating in an established region? So 25 million shouldn't be discounted because it's a ×3 increase, but 25 million shouldn't be discounted because with the right sponsor, it could actually generate Newcastle even more money. And the final thing that I would say is that clubs these days, and Newcastle are one of them, will be looking for something that's immersive. And by immersive, I mean, you don't just slap a badge on your shirt, you get something else from it. And the aviation sponsors are the best example of this. You're not just getting the money for the shirt sponsorship, you're also getting a preferential deal with that airline. So over the course of a season, how much are you saving on flights every time you need to ship 25 to 50 staff, particularly abroad, to a European game? You might be getting some barter on that as well. So you can maximize the relationship because they're not just about a logo in return for visibility. They're a logo that leads to sales, that leads to preferential deals, that leads to wider business in the region, that leads to brand growth. So again, we shouldn't look at this as 25 million a year. We should look at this as a very exciting 3 times increase with potential beyond that.
I just want to point that one out here in 200. I 100% agree that Ben is a great addition to your content, Steve Wraith, and he also has really nice woolly jumper. See, it's a woolly jumper appreciation society, Ben.
It's nice, isn't it?
Tom says, for Ben, who do you think's going to get relegated this season? It is so tight, and he is right. I mean, this bottom of the table, which Newcastle aren't involved in this season. Southampton bottom, 24 points. Everton, 28 points. Leicester, 29 points. And then just above Leicester, we have Forest on 30, Leeds on 30. West Ham might feel just out of it on 34, but we all know that there's always somebody who can drop like the proverbial stone. But Leeds, Forest, Leicester, Everton, and Southampton, all on level games. Goal difference, well, Leicester's probably in the driving seat with minus 13 goal difference. The rest of the teams around them, Southampton minus 30, Everton minus 25, Forest minus 31, Leeds minus 21. So Leicester got that proverbial extra point, I guess, but there's a huge game on the horizon tomorrow as well. Is it tomorrow or Monday? We've got Bournemouth, Leeds, and then Monday night we've got Leicester, Everton.
Yeah, I'm worried for Leicester in many ways, but the Everton game is going to be absolutely pivotal because we're at that stage of the season now where in the same way a Newcastle win against Spurs creates a swing because they're getting nothing and you're getting 3. So that's why they call them 6-pointers. At the bottom end of the table, any Leicester loss in the next couple of games, and if a result goes against them, there's breathing space. And this is what we've seen since the international break when Palace were in, I think at the time, 12th or 13th, but they were the top team in the bottom half of the table that was still in the relegation zone. And there was only 2 points between them and the bottom 3. And now because they've gone on a little bit of a run, and because Wolves have gone on a run, and because Bournemouth have gone on a run, I think you're not really looking at them anymore as in the relegation battle. So it's 15th and down. And even West Ham are probably safe, to be honest with you. And they've got a game in hand as well. So it's 3 from Leeds, Forest, Leicester, Everton, and Southampton. I think Southampton are goners. They got a good point, of course, against Arsenal, but they had to beat Bournemouth for me. I don't think they'll beat Newcastle. I think they'll lose away at Forest. I think that they might beat Fulham at home. I think they'll lose away at Brighton, and I think they'll lose to Liverpool on the final game of the season. So I think that they're gone. And my worry for Leicester and Leeds is that, as I've just said, Nottingham Forest for me will beat Southampton. They could get something at Palace on the last game of the season. I don't think they'll win away at Chelsea. I don't think they'll win at home to Arsenal, and away at Brentford is quite difficult. So I'd probably give Forest 4 more points. They might surprise us and pick up a point or 2 beyond that. So that takes them to 34, which means that Leeds need 4 points because they've got a preferable goal difference, and Leicester need 5 points. And then obviously from Everton's perspective below Leicester, they're in a lot of trouble as well. Remember, they've got to play Manchester City. They've got to go, I think, away at Wolves, but they do have home to Bournemouth on the final day. And I don't think that Bournemouth will have anything to play for. So it's obviously going to come down to the teams when they play each other. And this is why I think if Leicester beat Everton, they'll then stay up. But if Leicester fail to beat Everton, and especially if they lose to Everton, I think Leicester are in massive, massive trouble, because suddenly Everton have moved to 31, and then you're really worried because any win for Forest or Leeds or both, and Leicester are 4 adrift of safety, and they've only got 4 games to play. So it's just very concerning for me. So my hope is Leicester beat Everton, and then away at Fulham is winnable, but it's difficult because Liverpool at home, Newcastle away, even West Ham at home on the final game of the season. Tough for Leicester to get that many points, which means they've got to get out of the relegation zone and lead from the front. And I think it will all depend on Leicester-Everton. So my prediction is this. I think that Leeds United will go down. I think Southampton will go down. I think those are the 2 for sure. And the reason for that is because Bournemouth will take something from Leeds tomorrow, in my opinion. Leeds will then lose to Manchester City. They'll lose to Newcastle. They'll lose to Spurs on the final game of the season. And away at West Ham is not easy. So I think Leeds might either only get 1 more win or a couple of draws. And I think they'll go down on 32, 33 points because their goal difference is worse than Leicester's. And obviously, if between now and the end of the season, you're losing a bit, then they might start to fall into trouble as regards Forest. Then I think that the other side that will go down, because I kind of fancy Forest to pick up a few points, and I think that they might draw at Brentford or get something, and then I think they'll follow that up with a win against Southampton, and that's 4 points in the next 2 games maybe, which means that they're on 34. And suddenly you're only either 1 point or 1 win away from safety. So I think it's Southampton bottom. I think it's Leeds second bottom. And then I genuinely think that unless Leicester beat Everton, Leicester will be the 3rd team to go down. But I think Leicester will beat Everton. So my prediction is Southampton bottom, Leeds second bottom. And because I'm praying Leicester beat Everton, Everton 3rd bottom, Leicester 4th bottom, and then Nottingham Forest, West Ham and upwards.
Okay, a question from Craig. He says, does Ben know if City have a buyback clause for Lavia at Southampton? The kid's not far off. Bruno's level at 19 and I want him.
Yeah, I think that they do have a buyback clause, but it remains to be seen whether they'll activate it. But that's absolutely true. There is an option there. It's not currently eligible to be activated, which is why we've seen a lot of sides work on the Lavia side now to try and explore whether they can get a deal done, with Chelsea being one of them. I think Newcastle could look for sure, but there's a whole range of defensive midfielders that the club have been linked for, and a lot will depend with Lavia on Southampton. And if they go down, then he'll almost certainly leave, but also which clubs have got Champions League football. And that's when Newcastle are suddenly in a very strong position. But I think what we'll see is a flex from Newcastle this summer with Champions League football, because there'll be more budget to spend. So they could well therefore be in the mix for somebody like a Caicedo or an Alexis McAllister, who Liverpool are chasing. Lavia's one of them. We know Newcastle like Declan Rice, but I think Arsenal or even Chelsea is still more likely. But there's a range of options. And actually, if you're a club looking for a central midfielder or a defensive midfielder, you're sport for choice in the coming window. There's going to be a whole merry-go-round of movement. Some older players like Mateo Kovacic or even N'Golo Kante, if he doesn't sign at Chelsea, are available at value. You've got Lavia, you've got Declan Rice, you've got Moises Caicedo, you've got Alexis McAllister. I know not all of these now are defensive midfielders. You've got Conor Gallagher, who's probably available as a central to attacking midfielder. You've got Yuri Tielemans, you've got Edson Alvarez. Every single one of these players could potentially move. So I'm not sure that Newcastle can be termed front runners in any way, shape or form for a player like Lavia at this point. But I think Manchester City are not yet the rival, in the sense that there's no clear indication that they will activate their buyback clause. I think it's more Chelsea at this stage that are the ones to watch, and even maybe a Liverpool or a Manchester United, depending on whether they do or don't get other targets. And then with Newcastle, I think that they will look to bring in a midfielder. They'll look to still bring in also a more versatile, attack-minded midfielder that is of that sort of James Maddison mould. And we wait and see what else they do, because left back could be very important as well for me. And I would almost feel sorry for either Dan Burn or Matt Targett if they bring in a left back. But I think that once you've got Champions League football, it's just something that needs to be done, because there's that ability to bring in a really traditional, defined, quality, elite level left back that will, unfortunately for those two, supplant them in that particular position. And that will push both down the pecking order. Of course, Burn is more versatile, but it's just the reality of the situation that as you get Champions League football, you're not just going to sit still and reward the current squad and barely sign anybody. You're going to try and add, yes, depth, but where you can, people to your starting 11. And I think that a starting left back, even though, as I say, Burn and Targett haven't done a great deal wrong, is probably the one position that I can see Eddie Howe looking for somebody new that isn't only squad or depth, and as I say, is starting 11. So that's one to watch as well.
Definitely is. Will Ben ever divulge those sporting directors that told him Botman wasn't cut out for the Premier League?
No comment.
No comment. Will Maddison leave, and is Spurs a place he favours?
Yeah, I mean, I've said many times, it's funny sometimes, isn't it? Because we've been talking for so long on this, probably even back to January. And the indication I always gave was that Leicester wanted to keep Maddison over January, and that in the summer, he would in all likelihood go. And why would he go in the summer? Because at that point, he could assess whether or not the club he was joining had Champions League football and negotiate accordingly and walk in a pre-season knowing exactly what he's getting. It's a more stable time to move. And this is why in January, it's very much a seller's market, and in the summer, it's a buyer's market. My opinion hasn't changed. Again, now, a bit like when I said Newcastle want McTominay, and 6 months later, everyone's getting excited about McTominay, but they've always been chasing McTominay, and it's the same with Maddison. Newcastle have always tried for Maddison, but the summer's the only realistic possibility they can get. And if they get Champions League football and Spurs don't, it's game on. But as of now, or certainly as of January, Maddison was waiting, and Spurs is also a very realistic possibility. So there may be a desire to stay in London. There may be a desire to take a bigger wage, because Newcastle, even with Champions League football, are not going to be able to throw their wage structure out the window. Spurs' wage structure is higher. There may be a belief in whoever Spurs' new manager is and a long-term project. And there also, from Maddison's perspective, may need to be a pitch as to where's he going to play and is he straight in the starting 11 at either club. And you can make arguments for both. I would drop him into a Newcastle starting 11. Others might disagree. In Spurs, there's a lot more competition, arguably, but both have got good options now in these positions and players that are playing well. But I don't think the situation has changed. Maddison will decide in the summer. He will decide based on location and Champions League football. He will almost certainly leave Leicester. And if Leicester go down, it will be definite. And the two current, but we must stress things can change when the window opens, the two most current likely suitors are Newcastle United and Spurs. And that's been the case since January.
Yeah, I would agree. Okay, quick prediction for Newcastle versus Southampton, mate.
4-0 Newcastle. I think it'll be one of those again. I think comfortable. I know what Southampton did, both away at Chelsea where they won narrowly and against Arsenal, was fantastic. They've been Jekyll and Hyde. And sometimes when they score early, they show a lot of potential and a lot of resilience, but it's too big a game at St James's Park, off the back of battering Spurs, off the back of eventually scoring in a flurry against Everton. Newcastle got a real win from that Man U Spurs game because the late equaliser means that neither side got a good result out of that compared to Newcastle. And now they can slip up. But if they're going to slip up, you slip up against Arsenal and you slip up, by the way, against Leicester to keep us up. But you don't slip up against Southampton. It's so important that they win this game because if you do so, they are basically over the line. I mean, think about a scenario. I know we have to factor in Brighton as well, so apologies if I get the maths wrong, and also Liverpool too. But we can get a scenario where effectively the table might read, depends again what Liverpool do too, and Brighton with their games in hand. But we could get a scenario, if everything goes perfect, when Newcastle United move to 65 and the team in fifth place has got 54. And if that team on 54 has played 34 games, then they can ultimately only get 12 more points. And it's an 11-point gap, which means that there is a possibility if Newcastle beats Southampton that it's practically done over the course of the coming days. And there is a course that takes place. And again, it would need a fair few results to go where if Newcastle win back-to-back games, they're mathematically in the Champions League. And how astonishing would that be to be in the Champions League with 3 or 4 games to spare? Then you can play your youth team against Leicester and let us win 10-0 intentionally to help keep us up because Newcastle love Leicester, because everybody loves me, and everybody would be happy. So I think Southampton is so important because if Newcastle beats Southampton, 1, they might be practically over the line, but 2, they can lose to Arsenal and there's no panic. I'm not saying they will lose to Arsenal, but if they lose to Arsenal, there's no panic. If they lose to Southampton and then lose to Arsenal, you start to worry because it's away at Leeds, it's tricky. It's home to Brighton, it's tricky. It's home to Leicester, you lose 5-0. And then you've got to go away at Chelsea and find 3 points potentially. So you can't afford to slip up in this, on paper, winnable game. And I think that we will see that in the energy and intensity and selection and atmosphere. Beat Southampton and Newcastle over the line for me. And I don't want to jinx it, but beat Southampton and I genuinely think that Newcastle United are over the line. And the reason why, again, is because I think 4th place will have 68 points, maybe even 67 at this rate, because that's going to require all the teams on 54 points or less to get 13 points from their last 4 or 5 games. So they basically got to win 4 out of the 5. And some of them are playing each other, let's not forget as well. So 4-0 Newcastle, and then Liverpool are playing Tottenham. That's the first thing to say. So if Spurs lose and Liverpool win, then Liverpool come into the box seat, but still somebody's dropped more points. So if Newcastle win, I think whoever loses, or if they draw out of those 2, they can't catch Newcastle anymore. And then when you flip forward to the next round of games, Liverpool might beat Fulham, Liverpool might beat Brentford, so maybe they're ones to watch. Spurs might beat Palace, I know, but Newcastle United are not going to lose all of their remaining games. So beat Southampton and watch 1, if not both, of Liverpool and Spurs drop points. And you're basically over the line, in my opinion. but lose to Southampton and watch Liverpool or Tottenham either win or both gain points and then lose to Arsenal, and maybe it becomes a bit nervy again. So this might sound a strange thing to say because they've been in a League Cup final. They've beaten Spurs 6-1, which was clearly the most pivotal game of the season. They've backed it up by winning against Everton. But in a weird way, because it's Liverpool Spurs, and because of that swing, this feels like the most important game of the season. And that is just because every game until Newcastle get Champions League football is the most important game of the season. But it just feels like if you batter Southampton, or even if you just win 1-0 in an ugly performance, because of that Liverpool Spurs game, you're done. You're not mathematically over the line, but you're there. But lose to Southampton, and it's a bit of panic because Arsenal's next and then Leeds is next. So I think they'll win. I think they'll win comfortably. But again, it feels to me like a massive, massive game. And my prediction is 4-0.
Well, I'm taking 5-1 because one of the lads who regularly follows the show has had 5-1 against Spurs. Obviously, it was 6-1. Had 5-1 against Everton. It was 4-1. So he's going for 5-1 again tomorrow, and I'm going to do the same. I'm also going to put a daft quid on 10-0, which, of course, is the Premier League record. Because if Newcastle's going to do it, now's the time to do it when they're banging goals in, Ben. So we will wait and see. Next time I have you on the show, I could be sporting a new jumper because I'll have been able to buy in a brand new jumper off the back of my winnings.
A Champions League jumper.
A Champions League jumper, yeah. Listen,
actually, can I just say, one really cool thing is that if Newcastle make Champions League, if they do what they did with Leicester, which I'm sure they will, the club shop will have obviously a range of merchandise, and you can put the Champions League logo on everything, but also the club tends to get official Champions League merchandise made with their logos. So I just thought that was great as a fan, you know, to be able to go into the club shop and buy my dad a jumper with a Leicester logo and a Champions League logo, or buy the shirt for next season and put the Champions League badge on the arm. I know it sounds
I agree with you, but there is a problem at Newcastle, and I can't prove it. I can't prove it 100%, but Castoria is the problem. And somewhere, somebody owns something at Castoria, I am sure, who used to have ownership of the football club, and I'm fairly sure that Newcastle will struggle to make anything out of that shop until the Castoria deal is done. I think
I mean, you put the logo on the arm though of any shirt.
Oh yeah, I agree. Yeah, but Newcastle won't see the benefit of it. The fans will see the benefit of it, but will Newcastle?
Yeah,
see the
but it's a
benefit
strange
of it?
one,
No.
honestly, because we take the Champions League for granted because we watch it all the time and we enjoy it. And there'll be many Newcastle fans, particularly of a slightly younger generation, that will have never been to a European game or, of course, a Champions League game. We think back to some of the results when they were in Europe, but that's not every generation. So there'll be a lot of sort of teenagers and early 20s that either don't remember it or maybe weren't even born for it. And I can tell you categorically that it might seem like a small thing, but when you get the ability to put something like that on a shirt and wear it, it feels special because it's rare. And that's the sort of perversity and paradox of it all, that hopefully from Newcastle's perspective, it happens season on season. And then you become a bit blasé about it. You expect it and you moan if you don't get it. But trust me, in that first season, if you put on a shirt with a nice new sponsor that you know is making the club 25 million and a Champions League logo on the right-hand sleeve, and you go to that first Champions League home group game, it's going to feel incredible. Not just because they're there, but because something as simple as a logo on the right-hand side of a sleeve with a new shirt and a new sponsor, and you're wearing it, it can just bring home the reality of where the club is now and how everything is moving in the right direction and how you've got club and city and ownership group all behind one thing. And this is why I think Newcastle United fans are still peeved off when we as journalists report on the negative stuff, because they're sort of like, stop bursting our bubble. You can't touch us at the moment. We're happy. And why are we happy? Because again, as I've said many times, it's not just about the football. It's about what the football club does for Newcastle as a city, which is so unique. And you don't get that with all the London clubs in quite the same way. You don't even get that in Leicester, but you did when we won the Premier League, because every single person, football fan or fair weather, 90-year-old woman that's never been to a game or diehard fan, everyone wanted a piece of it. And the piece of it was a piece of the party, a piece of the culture, a piece of the unity, a piece of the relief that everyone can kind of smile and use sport to escape, or use sport to celebrate, or use sport to spend their money, or use sport to connect with their family, or use sport just to talk about because it's an event, even if you know nothing about it. And there'll be people like that in Newcastle that know nothing about Newcastle, can barely name a Newcastle player. But when they qualify for the Champions League, they see it on the news and they say, wow, everyone's happy, everyone's smiling. And what does that mean for me? And it might be as simple as somebody who's ill and lonely in an old age home who has never been a football fan, but Newcastle qualify for the Champions League and the game gets put on and everyone gathers and has a hug at the end, or you get free donuts from a bakery because Newcastle have qualified. And that's the bizarre part that somebody remembers. And they're like, remember that day when Newcastle qualified for the Champions League? And I didn't know what was happening, but I got a free donut or I made a new friend. And then, of course, at the other end, you have your diehard fans that they'll actually be crying and it will be memories that they record for the rest of their life. But we have to understand that this is not only about some Saudi plot to dominate and financially dope. And I'm not in any way, by the way, saying that's happened to this point. But again, as journalists, we try and be balanced. But what I'm saying is that I take issue with an attack on Newcastle United at the moment because I'm aware of how unique the city is, and I'm aware of what this means beyond only football. These aren't football fans that are just celebrating because they want to stick a middle finger up to their rivals and say, we're the new kids in town, we're back like we were under Keegan, and now we're going to dominate and you're all just jealous. This is also about a city that's gone through quite tough times in the pandemic. It's not affluent for everyone. It's hard-earned money to go and watch Newcastle United. But there's also a massive proportion that just see that big stadium at the top of a hill and it's near the castle and they don't go, but they know what it means. And they know that when Newcastle win, that roar, that feel good, it permeates down the hill and into the city in a variety of walks of life. And it helps create a bond that has got almost nothing to do with football. And if Newcastle succeed, then everyone in the city is better off for it. And that is why I think that we need to understand the uniqueness. It's not only Newcastle, but it's unique in Newcastle, in my opinion. And we need to pay respect to that and we need to celebrate that. And if that is with a Champions League logo on someone's arm, or if that's with a free donut because Newcastle is succeeding, we mustn't undervalue that, and we mustn't criticize that, because this isn't sport. This is community and unity that sport is helping to provide. And if you can't celebrate that, to be honest with you, what's the point in living?
Yeah, great stuff, mate. As always, absolute pleasure to have you on the show. And yeah, I mean, it's best of luck, I guess, from me to you, mate, for your game on Monday. I hope you win. I hope you beat Everton, mate. Best of luck with that.
Fingers crossed, and have a good weekend, everyone.
Yeah, look forward to seeing you again soon, Ben. Take care. Thanks everybody for chatting. Bye bye.
Of Children's Commissioner is conducting an inquiry into every aspect of child sexual exploitation by groups and gangs.
What can I do for you?
Late payer. Got himself into all sorts. I don't like the look of the wolves at his door. I want my pound of flesh first.
We're looking for James London.
Just about yesterday, the kid.
Can't let them do that. What's to this one?
She said they paid top dollar. Always do for the pure ones.
You think she'll thank you for it? You've already made your mind up.
Elsie, I'm here to rescue you. You understand me? Why are you so grumpy?
Drug dealers killed the only people I've ever loved.
I can smell that sweet, tiny thing from here.
Boo.
Where are we going?
Home. She died hating you, Mum.
Yeah, well, she died ashamed of you. Can I help you, mister?
It seems one of your animals has gone loose. I want to know who he is. I want to know where he is. And I want to know where he's going.
Always have an escape plan. And never let them see you bleed. You don't think I know what you are? Go do what you do best.
To market, to buy a fat back.